hospital corridor held its breath under sterile white light as Ethan Walker placed divorce papers into his wife's hands, just steps away from the ICU where their son was fighting to stay alive. His voice was calm, rehearsed. Behind him, Vanessa Grant, her closest friend, stood in quiet confirmation of what was already decided. Nurses paused. No one intervened. Monica Flores didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply looked at the signature line. The same hand that had signed something else earlier that day, something worth $30 billion. If you believe silence can hold more power than betrayal, stay with this story until the end. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if stories like this matter to you, consider subscribing. Monica Flores had always been the kind of woman people underestimated on first impression, not because she lacked presence, but because she chose not to use it. She spoke when necessary. She listened when others filled the silence. And in rooms where people competed to be seen, she preferred to remain just outside the center, watching the patterns no one else seemed to notice. It was a habit she had carried since long before her marriage, long before the hospital corridors and the quiet hum of machines became the background of her days. At 36, Monica did not look like someone whose life had been quietly splitting in two. Her posture remained straight, even after nights without sleep. Her voice, when she used it, was steady. Her movements were precise, almost deliberate, as if every gesture had already been considered before it was made. To the nurses who saw her daily, she was the composed mother who never raised her voice, never panicked, never asked the same question twice. But they did not see the notebook. It was small, unremarkable. Dark cover, no label. It stayed in her bag, tucked beneath documents and chargers, brought out only when no one was paying attention. Inside, her handwriting was clean structured. Dates, times, observations. Not emotional reflections, not complaints. Just facts. Monica had learned a long time ago that facts were more reliable than reactions. Across the corridor, beyond a set of reinforced glass doors, her son lay surrounded by machines that spoke in soft, rhythmic signals. Lucas Walker was 8 years old. His world had become smaller over the past year, first reduced to hospital visits, then to longer stays, and eventually to a single room where the light never fully dimmed. There were days when he was awake enough to smile at her. There were days when he wasn't. Monica adjusted to both without outward change. She read to him when he could listen. She sat beside him when he couldn't. She learned the patterns of his breathing, the subtle shifts in the monitors, the way the doctors spoke when they were hopeful, and the way they spoke when they were not. She did not interrupt them. She did not plead. She listened. Ethan Walker had once admired that about her. Years ago, when they first met, he had described Monica as unshakable. It had sounded like respect then. At the time, he was drawn to the way she didn't compete for attention, the way she didn't need to prove anything to anyone in the room. He had been ambitious even then, always looking toward the next step, the next promotion, the next version of himself he believed he was meant to become. Monica had been different. Grounded, focused, quietly certain. For a while, those differences had fit together. But somewhere along the way, Ethan's admiration had shifted into something less generous. What he once saw as strength, he began to interpret as passivity. What once felt like stability started to feel to him like limitation. He didn't say it directly. Ethan rarely did. Instead, it appeared in smaller ways. Missed dinners became common. At first, he explained them. Meetings that ran late. Clients who needed his attention. Opportunities he couldn't afford to decline. Monica accepted these explanations without argument, not because she believed every word, but because she understood something else had begun to take priority in his life. Then came the changes that didn't require explanation. He stopped asking about her work, not abruptly, gradually. Conversations that once included both of them narrowed until they focused almost entirely on his schedule, his concerns, his plans. When Monica mentioned her own projects, he listened with a kind of polite distance, as though the details were too small to hold his interest for long. "She's always on those calls," he had once said, half-joking to a colleague during a dinner. "I'm not even sure what she does anymore." The table had laughed lightly. Monica had smiled. She did not correct him. What Ethan didn't understand was that Monica's work had never required his validation. It had never required visibility at all, long before the hospital, long before the strain that illness brought into their home. Monica had been building something quietly. Her involvement in a medical technology company had started as a collaboration. An idea shaped alongside a small group of specialists who believed healthcare could be made more precise, more responsive, more human. Over time, her role expanded, not publicly, not in ways that drew attention, but in ways that mattered. She understood systems. She understood how decisions moved through layers of approval, how data translated into outcomes, how a single overlooked detail could become a larger failure if left unchecked. While others focused on presentation, Monica focused on structure. She did not need to be the face of anything. She needed it to work. Ethan never asked enough questions to see that, and Monica never offered more than he seemed willing to hear. By the time Lucas became sick, the distance between them had already taken shape. The diagnosis did not create the fracture. It revealed it. In the early weeks, Ethan had tried. He showed up to appointments. He asked questions. He sat beside Monica in waiting rooms that smelled faintly of antiseptic and quiet dread. For a while, they moved as a unit again, aligned by the singular focus of their son's survival. But endurance reveals character in ways intention cannot sustain. The longer Lucas remained in the hospital, the more the routine settled into something that demanded consistency. Not just presence, but patience. Not just concern, but repetition. Ethan's attendance began to thin. At first, he missed a follow-up appointment. Then a late-night call from a nurse. Then an entire weekend visit that he explained away with a business obligation he described as unavoidable. Monica noted each absence. Not emotionally, factually. Date, time, reason given. Across from her, in the quiet spaces where Ethan used to sit, another presence became more frequent. Vanessa Grant. She had been part of Monica's life for nearly a decade. They met through overlapping professional circles drawn together by a shared understanding of responsibility and long hours. Vanessa was everything Monica was not: outwardly expressive, warm, quick to fill silence with reassurance. She knew how to speak in ways that made people feel supported. In the hospital, that mattered. Vanessa brought coffee. She remembered names. She asked nurses about their shifts and thanked them in ways that felt personal. She sat with Monica during long nights, offering conversation when it seemed needed and quiet when it did not. To anyone watching, she was exactly what a friend should be. Even Ethan seemed relieved by her presence. "You don't have to do this alone," he had said once, gesturing toward Vanessa with a kind of appreciation that lingered a moment too long. Monica had followed his gaze. She noticed the details others might have missed. The way Vanessa responded before Monica spoke. The way Ethan's tone softened in her direction. The timing of their arrivals, the ease of their exchanges when they thought no one was paying attention. None of it was enough on its own to confirm anything. But Monica did not rely on single moments. She watched patterns. And patterns over time became difficult to ignore. One evening, as the hospital lights dimmed slightly to signal the passing of another long day, Monica sat alone in the family waiting area. Lucas was asleep. The machines around him had settled into a steady rhythm. The corridor outside his room was quieter than usual. Ethan had said he would be there. He wasn't. Vanessa had arrived instead. She carried 2 cups of coffee, placing one gently on the table beside Monica before sitting across from her. He got pulled into something Vanessa explained, her voice soft-practiced. He asked me to come. Monica nodded once. She did not ask what had pulled him away. She did not ask when he would return. Instead, she reached into her bag, her fingers brushing against the edge of the notebook before moving past it. "Thank you," she said. Vanessa smiled, and for a moment, the room returned to stillness. But beneath that stillness, Monica had already begun to understand something that neither of them had spoken aloud. The shape of absence, the weight of substitution, and the quiet certainty that what was unfolding around her had not started today. She lifted the coffee, letting the warmth settle into her hands without drinking it. Across the room, the clock moved forward in steady, indifferent increments. Monica watched it for a moment. Then, she looked down, not at Vanessa, but at the reflection of the overhead lights on the polished surface of the table. It was clear, undisturbed, like everything else on the surface. She reached for her bag, and this time she took out the notebook. Monica Flores did not begin with suspicion. She began with discrepancy. It was never a single moment that shifted her understanding, never a sudden revelation that forced her to confront what she had been avoiding. Instead, it was a gradual accumulation of details that did not align. Small inconsistencies that on their own could be dismissed. Together, they formed something else. Something structured, something intentional. Weeks before the hospital became her second home, Monica had already noticed the first deviation. It was in Ethan's schedule, though he never presented it that way. He had always been busy, always moving between meetings, always advancing towards something he believed was just ahead. But there had been a rhythm to it before, predictable, even when it was demanding. That rhythm changed. Calls that used to happen in the office began happening outside. Messages that once appeared openly on his phone became less visible. Notifications silenced. Screens turned away at angles that suggested privacy, not habit. Monica did not confront him. She adjusted her observation. The first time she opened the notebook for this purpose, she wrote only 3 lines. Date, time. Call stepped outside. No conclusion, no accusation, just record. She had learned early in her professional life that patterns reveal themselves more clearly when they are not forced into meaning too soon. Data left untouched by assumption tends to organize itself. So she waited, and she recorded. Across the following days, the entries multiplied. Late return. No explanation beyond meeting ran long. Phone placed face down during dinner. Message received. No response until the leaving room. Each note remained neutral in tone, but their frequency began to form a pattern that was difficult to ignore. Still, Monica said nothing. Because what she needed was not confirmation through reaction. She needed clarity. At the same time, another part of her life was moving towards something far larger than anything happening inside her home. The company she had helped build quietly, deliberately, was entering its most critical phase. For years, their work had existed beneath the surface of the industry, a series of innovations in predictive medical systems designed to identify and respond to early indicators of severe conditions before they escalated. It was not flashy work. It did not attract headlines. But it was effective. And effectiveness in time draws attention. The interest had come first from smaller firms, then from larger entities that recognized the long-term implications of what Monica and her team had created. Eventually, that interest converged into something more focused, a single entity with the capacity to scale the technology globally, a multinational healthcare conglomerate. The negotiations had begun months earlier. They were complex, layered, structured across multiple legal and financial frameworks that required precision at every stage. Monica was not the public face of the company, but within the negotiation, her role was central. She understood the architecture of the system they were selling, better than anyone else. She understood its limitations, its potential, and its value. $30 billion was not a number that appeared suddenly. It was calculated, defended, justified line by line across countless hours of discussion. Monica attended those discussions the same way she approached everything else. Quietly, completely. While Ethan moved further into a life that did not include her work, Monica moved deeper into one that would eventually redefine hers. She did not tell him. Not because she intended to hide it forever, but because she understood timing, and because she had already begun to see that disclosure at the wrong moment can distort outcomes. The hospital changed the pace of everything, once Lucas was admitted for extended care. Monica's days divided into two parallel tracks that rarely intersected in visible ways. During the early hours, she was a mother. She sat beside Lucas's bed, monitored his condition, spoke with doctors in measured tones that revealed both understanding and restraint. She asked precise questions, not out of fear, but out of necessity. She absorbed information, quickly adjusting her expectations without allowing them to collapse into emotion. In the late hours, she became something else, a participant in negotiations that spanned time zones, conducted through encrypted calls and secure channels. She sat in empty consultation rooms, her laptop open under dimmed lights, discussing terms that would shape the future of the company. Her voice did not change between roles. Only the content did. No one in the hospital knew. And no one in her professional circle fully understood the extent of what was happening inside the hospital walls. She kept those worlds separate with precision, except for one variable that existed in both: Vanessa Grant. At first, Vanessa's presence in the hospital seemed natural. She had always been attentive, always ready to support in ways that others might overlook. She knew when to bring food, when to sit in silence, when to offer conversation that did not feel forced. But as the days passed, her involvement deepened in ways that extended beyond what was necessary. She knew Ethan's schedule before Monica mentioned it. She answered questions on his behalf without hesitation. She filled spaces he had begun to leave empty. Monica noted these details the same way she noted everything else. Vanessa, aware of Ethan's absence before explanation given, arrives within 20 minutes of his cancellation, uses language suggesting prior communication. Again, no conclusion, only structure. The first financial discrepancy appeared shortly after. It was minor, an amount that could easily be overlooked within the scope of their shared accounts. A transaction linked to a hotel reservation in a part of the city that neither of them had reason to visit recently. Monica did not react. She traced it, from the initial charge to the corresponding account activity. The timing, the duration, the absence of any related expense that would justify it as part of Ethan's work. She cross-referenced the date with her notes. That evening, Ethan had said he was at a client dinner. Monica wrote it down. No confrontation, no question. The second discrepancy followed within a week. Another transaction, different location, similar pattern. This time, she expanded her search. Email archives, shared calendar entries, even the metadata attached to files that passed through their home network. She was careful, not invasive beyond what she could legally access, but thorough. What she found was not a single piece of evidence that defined the situation. It was a pattern that aligned too precisely to ignore. Ethan's absences, Vanessa's timing, financial records that intersected both. Still, Monica did not act, because action without completion creates risk. And Monica did not move until she understood the full structure of what she was observing. One night, as she sat alone, in a dim consultation room, her laptop casting a soft glow across the table, she accessed an older device she had not used in months. A backup phone stored away rarely needed. It still contained fragments of past data. Among them, a synced message thread that had not fully transferred to their current system. At first glance, it appeared incomplete. Partial conversations, disconnected responses, but within those fragments, there were enough markers to suggest something else. Familiar language, references that aligned with her notes, and a tone that was unmistakably more personal than professional. Monica read through the thread once, then again. She did not scroll quickly. She did not skip ahead. She moved through it line by line, allowing each piece to settle into the structure she had already begun to form. When she finished, she closed the device and placed it beside her notebook. Outside the room, the hospital remained quiet. Machines continued their steady rhythms. Somewhere down the corridor, a nurse moved past with soft, measured steps. Monica sat still for a moment, her hands resting lightly on the table. There was no visible reaction, no outward shift. But internally, the structure had completed itself. Not fully proven, not yet presented, but understood. She reached for her notebook. This time the entry was longer, not emotional, not reactive, but more detailed than anything she had written before. Because now she was no longer recording isolated discrepancies. She was documenting a pattern with direction. And for the first time, she did not need to ask herself whether something was wrong. She only needed to decide when it would matter. The shift in Lucas's condition did not arrive suddenly. It unfolded in increments so small that only someone who had been watching as closely as Monica could recognize the pattern. The doctors described it carefully using language designed to avoid finality. Words like progression, response variability, and monitoring closely replaced anything that might resemble certainty. Monica listened without interruption. She had learned to translate their language. What they meant was that time had begun to narrow. Lucas no longer woke as often. When he did, his awareness flickered present, one moment distant the next. His voice, once soft but clear, had thinned into something fragile, as if each word required more energy than his body could spare. Monica adjusted again. She spoke less, but she stayed closer. Her chair remained beside his bed, angled just enough for her to see both his face and the monitors without turning. She memorized the cadence of the machines, the intervals between beeps, the subtle fluctuations that signaled change before anyone said it out loud. Nurses came and went. Doctors checked charts, conferred quietly near the door, entered with controlled expressions that never fully revealed what they were thinking. Monica watched all of it. And in between those moments, she opened her laptop. The hospital had designated small consultation rooms for private discussions. Most families use them for difficult conversations with physicians. Monica used them differently. Late at night, when the corridors emptied and the noise softened into a distant hum, she would step inside, close the door, and connect to a world that existed far beyond the walls of the hospital. On the screen, the tone shifted. Voices were sharper. Language was precise. Numbers moved across documents with weight and consequence. There were no soft edges in these conversations, no room for hesitation. Every term carried implication. Every clause shaped outcome. Section 14 needs to be revised, one of the legal advisors said during a call that stretched well past midnight. The liability exposure under international expansion isn't adequately contained. Monica leaned slightly forward, her expression unchanged. It's not the exposure that needs revision, she replied calmly. It's the assumption behind the model. You're projecting based on static data. The system adapts in real time. That reduces long-term liability, but only if it's structured correctly from the start. There was a pause on the other end. Then a shift in tone. Understood, the advisor responded. We'll restructure the clause accordingly. Monica nodded once, though no one needed to see it. She closed the document, opened another, and continued. Outside the room, her son lay connected to machines that measured his ability to remain in the world. Inside, she negotiated terms that would reshape an industry. She did not allow those realities to overlap, because if they did, one would compromise the other. And Monica had learned that compromise in critical moments leads to loss. Ethan was not present for any of these nights. His absence had become consistent enough that it no longer required explanation. When he did appear, it was often during hours, when the hospital felt less intense mid-morning visits that allowed him to maintain the appearance of involvement without confronting the full weight of what was happening. He spoke in generalities. "How's he doing? What did the doctor say?" Questions that sounded appropriate, but lacked the precision Monica had come to expect from someone who truly needed to know. She answered without elaboration. "Stable for now. They're monitoring." Short responses, factual, complete. Ethan rarely pressed further. His attention moved quickly, shifting toward his phone, toward messages that required immediate response, toward obligations that existed somewhere beyond the hospital walls. Monica noted the pattern. Not just his absence, but the quality of his presence when he was there. Visit duration 27 minutes. Checked phone repeatedly. Left before physician update. Each entry remained detached, because the purpose was not to judge, it was to establish record. Vanessa, in contrast, seemed to understand exactly how long to stay. Long enough to be noticed, long enough to be appreciated, but never long enough to disrupt whatever else she had arranged. She arrived with quiet efficiency. Coffee placed gently within reach. Food that Monica often did not touch, but always acknowledged. Conversations that filled space without demanding emotional response. To anyone observing, she was the steady presence, the reliable one, the one who showed up. Monica did not dispute that. She simply observed how and when Vanessa chose to do so. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the narrow windows of the corridor, casting pale reflections along the polished floor, Monica stood near the nurse's station, reviewing a chart with one of the attending physicians. "The next 48 hours are critical," the doctor explained, his voice low but direct. "We need to be prepared for rapid changes." Monica nodded. "I understand." Her tone did not shift. No visible reaction, just acknowledgement. Behind her, a familiar voice approached. "I brought lunch. Vanessa." Monica turned slightly. Vanessa stood there, composed as always, holding a small bag in one hand, her expression arranged into something that balanced concern and reassurance. "I thought you might need something," she added. Monica looked at the bag, then at Vanessa. "Thank you. Nothing more." The exchange was simple, controlled. But in that moment, Monica noticed something she had not recorded before. Vanessa's eyes moved not toward Lucas's room, not toward the doctor, but briefly toward the end of the corridor where Ethan usually entered. A reflex, quick, almost imperceptible, but present. Monica registered it. Later that evening, as the hospital settled into its quieter rhythm, Monica returned to the room where Lucas lay. The monitors continued their steady pattern, though the intervals had begun to stretch in ways she recognized. She sat beside him, her hand resting lightly against his arm. He did not wake. She did not expect him to. After a while, she reached for her bag. The notebook came out. She turned to a new page. Vanessa's arrival coincides with Ethan's absence. Visual cue, anticipatory glance toward corridor. Behavior consistent with prior pattern. The entries were longer now, more connected, less about isolated moments, more about continuity. A few minutes later, her phone vibrated. A message from Ethan. Running late. Something came up. "Vanessa's there, right?" Monica read it once. Then again. Her gaze remained steady. She did not respond immediately. Instead, she opened another application. The shared account. A new transaction had appeared. Time stamped less than an hour earlier. Another hotel, different location, same structure. She cross-referenced the time. Ethan's message had been sent 10 minutes after the charge. Monica closed the application. Then, she opened her notebook again. Transaction log time aligns with message. Explanation provided non-specific. Pattern confirmed. She paused for a moment, her pen resting lightly against the paper. This was no longer discrepancy, no longer uncertainty. It was alignment. Across behavior communication and financial record, across absence and substitution, across what was said and what was done. Monica closed the notebook. She did not look at Vanessa. She did not respond to Ethan. Instead, she adjusted the blanket around Lucas with gentle precision and stepped out into the corridor. The hospital lights remained unchanged. Bright, clinical, indifferent. At the far end, a set of glass doors reflected her image back at her. Still composed, still controlled, still unreadable to anyone who might pass by. Monica paused there for a moment. Not to hesitate, but to consider sequence. Because understanding was no longer the question. The structure was clear, the pattern complete. What remained was timing. And Monica Flores had never been careless with timing. She turned back toward Lucas's room without urgency. Behind her, somewhere beyond the reach of the hospital's quiet order, Ethan Walker continued moving through a version of his life that depended entirely on what he believed Monica did not know. He was wrong. But the cost of that mistake had not yet been introduced, not fully, not in a way he could understand. That would come later. For now, Monica returned to her chair beside her son. She sat, she waited, and she kept everything exactly where it needed to be, until it mattered. By the time the pattern became undeniable, it had already existed long enough to grow roots. Not in the open. Not in ways that could be easily named or confronted. But in the quiet spaces between absence and explanation, between what was said and what was consistently avoided. From the outside, nothing had officially changed. Ethan Walker was still a husband. Vanessa Grant was still a friend. Monica Flores was still the one who remained. But beneath that surface, the structure had already shifted. And the narrator knew what Monica was now certain of, even if she had not spoken it aloud. Ethan and Vanessa had crossed a line months ago. It had not happened in a moment of confusion or weakness. It had developed with intention, shaped by opportunity, and sustained by the assumption that Monica would never look closely enough to see it. They were wrong. It began as these things often do with conversation, not the kind that reveals itself immediately, but the kind that builds gradually under the protection of familiarity. Vanessa had always been present, always within reach of Monica's life, which made her presence around Ethan seem natural, almost inevitable. Shared concern for Lucas became shared time. Shared time became shared understanding. And somewhere along that progression, the boundary shifted without either of them acknowledging it directly. The first time it became explicit, it was quiet. A hotel room reserved under a name that did not immediately connect to either of them. A location chosen not for convenience, but for distance from their usual patterns. Time carved out of schedules that appeared to anyone else entirely accounted for. They did not speak about Monica there. Not at first. They spoke about pressure, about responsibility, about how their lives had become narrower, more defined by obligation than by choice. Ethan framed it as loss. Vanessa framed it as escape. Neither of them framed it as betrayal. That came later, but not in the way one might expect, because for Ethan the shift was not accompanied by guilt. It was accompanied by justification. He had begun to see himself as someone who had been overlooked. Not by the world. His career continued to move forward, but within his own home. Monica's silence, her composure, her refusal to engage in emotional conflict had gradually become in his mind a kind of absence. He interpreted her restraint as distance, her focus as indifference. And in that interpretation, he found permission. Vanessa understood that interpretation. She reinforced it carefully, not overtly, not in ways that could be traced back as influence, but in small affirmations. You've been carrying everything. She doesn't see what you're dealing with. You deserve something that feels lighter. The words were chosen with precision. They did not accuse Monica directly. They did not need to. They simply reshaped Ethan's perception until his decisions felt to him reasonable, necessary even. From there, the progression was inevitable. Meetings extended into evenings. Evenings into nights. Messages became more frequent, more personal, more immediate. They developed a rhythm that existed parallel to the life Ethan still maintained at home. A rhythm Monica had already begun to map. Back in the hospital, that rhythm intersected with something far less abstract. Lucas's condition continued to decline, not dramatically, but steadily. The doctors no longer spoke in terms of improvement. They spoke in terms of management, stabilization, preparation. Monica absorbed each update without visible reaction. But her time with Lucas shifted. She no longer scheduled around potential recovery. She structured her presence around what remained. She stayed closer, spoke less, observed more. Every detail mattered now. The way his hand responded when she held it, the slight movement of his eyes when he heard her voice, the intervals between breaths that required assistance. These were not moments she allowed herself to miss, because she understood something Ethan had chosen not to face. Time was not extending, it was narrowing. And still, Ethan was not there when it mattered most. One evening, as the sky outside the hospital darkened into a muted gray, the attending physician approached Monica with a level of directness that had been absent before. "We may need to make decisions quickly," he said. "If his condition shifts, we'll require immediate authorization for intervention." Monica nodded. "I'll be here." The doctor hesitated, then added, "We should have both parents available." Monica met his gaze. "I'll inform him." She already knew what that would mean. Later that night, when Lucas's monitors began to register irregular patterns, the call was placed. Not to Monica. She was already there. To Ethan. The phone rang. Once, twice. No answer. The nurse tried again. Still nothing. Minutes passed. The situation tightened. Vanessa's number appeared next in the contact list. The nurse dialed. This time the call was answered. "Hello," Vanessa's voice was immediate. "Present." The nurse explained quickly, her tone controlled but urgent. "We need Ethan Walker to return to the hospital immediately. It's about his son." There was a pause. Brief. Then Vanessa responded, "I'll let him know. Not he's here. Not put him on. I'll let him know." Monica stood nearby, close enough to hear the exchange without needing to move. She did not interrupt. She did not react. She simply listened. The nurse ended the call, her expression tightening slightly as she turned back to Monica. "We'll proceed as needed," she said, "but we'll continue trying to reach him." Monica inclined her head once. "Thank you." No frustration, no visible disappointment, only acknowledgement. Inside Lucas's room, the machines adjusted, compensating for changes that were no longer subtle. Monica returned to her chair. She placed her hand gently against Lucas's arm. His skin was warm, too warm. She did not look at the door. She did not expect it to open. Minutes later, her phone vibrated. A message. From Ethan. What's going on? Vanessa said something about the hospital. Monica read it. Then she set the phone down without responding, because the question had already been answered. Just not to him. Across the city, in a room that existed outside the structure of responsibility, Ethan was still moving within the version of reality he had constructed for himself. One where his presence was optional, where timing could be negotiated, where consequences had not yet aligned with action. Monica did not need to imagine where he was. She already knew. Not from assumption, from record, from pattern, from the alignment of every detail she had been collecting for weeks. She reached for her notebook. The entry was precise. Emergency call, Ethan unreachable. Vanessa answered immediate response. Delay in acknowledgement, critical window. She paused, then added one more line. Parental absence documented. This was no longer about suspicion, no longer about betrayal in the abstract sense. This was about responsibility. Legal, moral, undeniable. Monica closed the notebook and placed it back into her bag. Inside the room, Lucas's breathing stabilized slightly under assisted support. The immediate crisis had passed. For now. But the trajectory remained unchanged. Monica adjusted her chair, moving slightly closer to the bed. She leaned forward, her voice low, steady. I'm here. Not a promise, a statement. Because she had been. Every time it mattered. Outside the room, the hospital continued its quiet operations, unaware of the full structure unfolding within one family's life. Ethan would return eventually. He would walk through the same doors, offer explanations, construct reasons that fit within the narrative he still believed he controlled. Vanessa would remain close-positioned, just enough to appear supportive, distant enough to avoid direct scrutiny. And Monica would not interrupt either of them, not yet, because the structure was not complete. There were still pieces to gather, still moments to document, still evidence to align. She would not act on partial truth. She would not risk the outcome by moving too early. That had never been her way. Instead, she remained exactly where she needed to be, beside her son, within the reality that neither Ethan nor Vanessa had fully understood. And as the machines continued their measured rhythm, marking time in a way that could not be negotiated or ignored, Monica Flores continued to build something far more precise than confrontation. She built record. She built sequence. She built the foundation for a moment that had not yet arrived, but would, inevitably. By the time the final phase of the deal approached, Monica Flores no longer divided her life into separate parts. There was no clear boundary between mother and strategist anymore. No clean line separating the hospital room from the negotiation table. The two had merged into a single continuum where timing, precision, and control determined everything. And Monica controlled what she could. The rest she observed. The email arrived just after 2:10 a.m. Subject line: Final confirmation, execution window. Monica read it once, her eyes moving steadily across the screen. No urgency, no visible reaction, just absorption. The message was brief. All parties aligned. Legal review complete. Final documents prepared. Execution required within the next 12 hours. Attached beneath the message were the contracts that had taken months to construct. Hundreds of pages distilled into a single moment. $30 billion, not as a number to be announced, but as a structure to be finalized. Monica closed the email without opening the attachments immediately. Instead, she looked up. Lucas was asleep. The machines continued their quiet work, their rhythm now familiar enough to fade into the background of her awareness. The dimmed lighting of the room softened the edges of everything, turning the space into something suspended between day and night. Monica stood slowly. She adjusted the blanket over Lucas with careful precision, ensuring nothing disrupted the lines connected to his arms. Then she stepped out into the corridor. The hospital at that hour felt different. Less movement, fewer voices. The sound of footsteps carried farther, echoing softly against polished floors. The nurses at the station spoke in lower tones, their conversations reduced to essential communication. Monica walked past them with a slight nod. She did not stop. At the end of the corridor, the consultation rooms remained empty. She entered one, closed the door, and sat. The laptop opened with a quiet click. The email was still there, waiting. Monica opened the attachments. The first document filled the screen dense with legal language structured across clauses and subsections that defined ownership, liability, governance, and control. Every term had been reviewed multiple times, challenged, adjusted, reinforced. She moved through it methodically, not quickly, not slowly, just thoroughly. Every section, every condition, every implication. Because she understood something that many in the negotiation did not. This was not the moment to trust the process. This was the moment to verify it. Outside the room, somewhere down the corridor, a monitor alarm sounded briefly before being silenced. Monica did not look up. She continued reading. Minutes turned into an hour, then more. Occasionally, her phone vibrated against the table, messages, notifications, reminders from a world that continued to operate on its own timeline. She did not check them. Not yet. At 3:47 a.m., the call came. Encrypted, scheduled. Monica accepted it without hesitation. Faces appeared across the screen. Lawyers, executives, advisors, each framed within their own controlled environments. Offices lit by soft lamps, backgrounds carefully neutral, expressions composed. Monica, one of them, began, "We're ready to proceed pending your final confirmation." Her image reflected back at her from the corner of the screen. Still, unchanged. She inclined her head slightly. "Proceed with the summary." They did. Key points restated for clarity. Transfer of equity. Retention of strategic control. Protection clauses designed to ensure that what had been built could not be dismantled or diluted after the fact. Monica listened. She did not interrupt. When they finished, there was a pause. Not long, but deliberate. "Do you have any final revisions?" the lead counsel asked. Monica's gaze remained steady. "No." Another pause. "Then we're prepared to execute upon your authorization." Monica did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached for her phone. The screen lit up. Messages from Ethan. Multiple. Time stamped over the past several hours. "Busy tonight. Don't wait up. Meeting ran late. Phone dying. Talk tomorrow." Monica read them without expression. Then she opened another application. The account. A new transaction. Time stamped less than an hour ago. Different location, same pattern. She closed it, set the phone down, and returned her attention to the screen in front of her. "All conditions verified," she said calmly. "You have authorization." There was no visible reaction from the others beyond professional acknowledgement. "Understood. Executing now." Documents moved. Signatures applied. Digital confirmations processed in sequence. What had taken months to build shifted in that moment into completion. Monica watched it happen, not with satisfaction, not with relief, but with clarity, because she understood that completion was not an endpoint. It was a transition. "Execution confirmed," the counsel said after a few minutes. "Congratulations." The word lingered briefly. Monica inclined her head once. "Thank you." The call ended. The screen returned to stillness. For a moment, Monica remained seated, her hands resting lightly on the table. $30 billion. Control secured. Structure finalized. And yet none of it altered the immediate reality waiting outside that room. She closed the laptop, stood, and stepped back into the corridor. The hospital remained unchanged. Lights steady, voices low. The world inside it operating on a scale that did not recognize financial magnitude. As Monica walked back toward Lucas's room, she passed the nurse's station again. One of them looked up. "Everything okay?" she asked quietly. Monica paused just long enough to respond. "Yes, nothing more." She continued. Inside the room, Lucas had not moved. The machines maintained their rhythm, though Monica could see, even before checking the monitors closely, that something had shifted again. Subtle, but present. She returned to her chair, sat, placed her hand gently against his. Warm, still. Monica exhaled slowly, not in relief, not in resignation, just as acknowledgement. Her phone vibrated again. Another message from Ethan. "Can't make it tonight. Early morning tomorrow." Monica looked at the screen. Then she set it face down. No response. Not now, not later. Because the information had already been recorded. Not just in her notebook, but in something far more permanent. Absence, documented, repeated, aligned with every other detail she had been collecting. She reached for her bag. The notebook came out. A new entry. Final execution completed. Time 04:12 a.m. She paused, then added Ethan absent. She closed the notebook, placed it back, and leaned slightly closer to Lucas. "I'm here," she said again, her voice quiet, steady. Outside, the first hints of morning began to press faintly against the edges of the sky, though the hospital lights remained unchanged, indifferent to the passage of time. Somewhere beyond those walls, Ethan Walker continued moving through a version of his life that had just been fundamentally altered without his knowledge. He would not understand it yet. Not the scale, not the consequence, not the timing, but the structure had already shifted, irreversibly, and Monica Flores, who had signed away nothing but secured everything, did not need to announce it. She only needed to wait. Because now, for the first time since the pattern had begun, every piece was in place. The record was complete, the sequence established, and the moment when it would matter was no longer distant. It was approaching, quietly, precisely, on her terms. By morning, nothing appeared different. The hospital remained unchanged in its quiet routines. Nurses rotated shifts with soft greetings and clipped updates. Doctors moved from room to room with practiced efficiency. Machines continued their steady rhythms, indifferent to the lives they measured. Monica Flores sat exactly where she had been. Her posture remained upright, her expression composed, her presence as always unobtrusive to anyone who did not know where to look. But internally, the structure of her world had shifted. The deal was done. Not in a way that demanded recognition, not in a way that altered the immediate environment, but in a way that redefined every decision that would follow. Monica did not announce it. She did not even acknowledge it outwardly. Because what mattered now was not what had been secured. It was how it would be used. Across the room, Lucas remained still beneath the filtered light. His breathing was assisted, his condition stabilized, only through constant intervention. The margin between recovery and decline had narrowed to something almost invisible. Monica adjusted the blanket near his shoulder, her movements careful, deliberate. "I'm here," she said quietly. It was the same phrase she had repeated countless times. But now it carried something else. Not just presence, control. Outside the room, footsteps approached. Measured, familiar. Monica did not turn immediately. She waited until the sound reached the threshold. Then she looked up. Ethan Walker stood in the doorway. He looked composed, well rested. His shirt pressed his posture steady, his expression arranged into something that suggested concern, without urgency. To anyone else, he might have appeared as a husband arriving after a long night of unavoidable commitments. Monica observed the details. No signs of fatigue. No residual tension. No indication that he had come from anywhere other than a place of comfort. "Hey," he said, his voice low, as if volume alone could signal care. Monica inclined her head slightly. "You're early." It was not a question. Ethan stepped inside, glancing briefly at Lucas before shifting his attention back to Monica. "I had something this morning, so I came by first. Something." The words settled into the space between them. Undefined, unchallenged. Monica did not ask for clarification. Instead, she returned her gaze to Lucas. "He had an episode last night," she said. Ethan's expression tightened just enough to register the information. "Is he okay for now?" A pause. Ethan moved closer, standing at the foot of the bed rather than beside it. His eyes lingered on the monitors, not long enough to read them, but long enough to appear attentive. "I didn't get the call," he said after a moment. Monica remained still. "The hospital tried," she replied. Ethan's jaw shifted slightly. "My phone," he began, then stopped. It must have been on silent. Monica did not respond, because the explanation, like the others before it, was already accounted for. Across the room, the machines continued their quiet work. Vanessa arrived 10 minutes later. The timing was precise, consistent. Monica noted it without reaching for the notebook. She no longer needed to write every detail. The pattern was established. Vanessa entered with the same controlled warmth she always carried. Her presence calibrated to the environment. "I brought coffee," she said softly, placing a cup on the table near Monica before acknowledging Ethan with a brief, familiar glance. There it was again. That glance. Quick, unspoken, but filled with context. Monica observed it without interruption. "Thanks." "Ethan," said, his tone shifting slightly, lighter, more natural. Vanessa smiled. "Of course." The three of them occupied the room in a quiet arrangement that to an outside observer might have appeared supportive. A husband, a wife, a close friend, all present for the same reason, but the alignment was no longer symmetrical. Monica could see it clearly now. Ethan positioned himself slightly toward Vanessa when he spoke. Vanessa responded with an attentiveness that extended just beyond what the moment required. Their timing overlapped, their language aligned, small details, but consistent. Monica did not interrupt. Instead, she stood. "I'm going to speak with the doctor," she said. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, let me know what they say." Vanessa added, "I'll stay here." Monica inclined her head once. Then she stepped out into the corridor. The door closed softly behind her. The moment it did, the space inside the room shifted. Not visibly, not in a way anyone could immediately identify, but in a way that removed the one variable that had been observing everything. Monica did not look back. She walked toward the end of the corridor where the consultation rooms remained available. But instead of entering one, she stopped near the glass doors that reflected the hallway back at her. Through the reflection, she could see movement behind her. Blended, subtle, but present. Ethan and Vanessa closer now, not touching, not overt, but no longer maintaining the distance they held when Monica was in the room. Monica watched for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turned away, not because she needed more confirmation, but because she already had enough. She continued down the corridor, her pace unchanged. Inside, Ethan exhaled slightly once the door closed. "You got the message late," Vanessa said under her breath. "I saw it this morning," he replied. She didn't say anything. She won't. Vanessa answered. There was a quiet confidence in her tone. "She doesn't push." Ethan nodded. "I know." The conversation ended there, because in their understanding, that was enough. Monica, in contrast, did not rely on assumption. As she reached the consultation room, she entered and closed the door behind her. The laptop remained in her bag, the phone in her hand. She opened it, not to check messages, but to review what had already been recorded. The timestamps, the transactions, the sequence of events from the previous night. Then she opened a secure channel, a message already waiting. From her legal team, post-execution protocols ready. Awaiting instruction, Monica read it, then typed a single response. Proceed with preparation. Do not initiate. She sent it, closed the application, and sat back for a moment, allowing the silence of the room to settle. She was not rushing, not accelerating, because now more than ever, timing mattered. Inside Lucas's room, Ethan and Vanessa resumed their positions. By the time Monica returned, the space had reset. Distance reestablished, expressions neutral, roles resumed. Monica entered without comment. She moved back to her chair, sat, placed her hand beside Lucas's, and remained there. Ethan checked his watch. I have to go, he said after a few minutes. I'll come back later. Monica nodded once. No protest, no expectation. Vanessa followed him toward the door. I'll walk you out, she said. Ethan did not object. They left together. The door closed. And once again, the room returned to stillness. Monica did not reach for the notebook immediately. Instead, she looked at Lucas, at the steady, fragile rhythm that defined everything that mattered in that moment. Then slowly she opened her bag, took out the notebook, and wrote. Joint departure synchronized. Behavior unchanged in presence of observer. Pattern stable. She paused, then added one final line. Ready. The word was small, but complete, because everything that needed to be seen had been seen. Everything that needed to be recorded had been recorded. And everything that needed to be secured had already been secured. Monica closed the notebook, placed it back into her bag, and leaned slightly closer to her son. I'm here, she said again. Outside, Ethan Walker walked down the corridor beside Vanessa Grant, still unaware that the version of control he believed he held had already shifted beyond his reach. Not dramatically, not visibly, but completely. And Monica Flores, who had said nothing, had already moved everything into place. By the time the deal existed as a completed structure, rather than a negotiation, Monica Flores understood that silence had become her most reliable advantage. Not because it concealed weakness, but because it allowed everything else to reveal itself without interference. The legal confirmations had continued through the early hours of the morning. Each document processed each clause, executed each safeguard, activated in the exact sequence that had been designed long before the final signature. There were follow-up emails, acknowledgments, internal notifications that would eventually expand outward into the industry. But for now, at Monica's instruction, everything remained contained. No press release, no announcement, no external movement, only internal alignment. And in that contained space, Monica continued exactly as she had before. At Lucas's bedside, present, attentive, unmoved in ways that mattered. The hospital, however, did not pause. Conditions evolved. And that morning, just after 9:20 a.m., the shift came again. Not dramatic, not sudden, but unmistakable. A nurse entered the room with a different level of focus, her movements more precise than routine required. She checked the monitors, adjusted a line, and then stepped back, her gaze briefly meeting Monica's before turning toward the hallway. I'm going to get the doctor, she said quietly. Monica nodded. She did not stand. She did not move closer. She simply placed her hand gently over Lucas's and waited. Within minutes, the room filled with controlled urgency. The attending physician entered with 2 additional staff members, their expressions neutral but intent. Instructions were given in low, efficient tones. Adjustments were made, numbers were monitored. Monica remained seated, not passive, not detached, but positioned in a way that allowed her to see everything without becoming part of the movement. She had learned that being still often revealed more than stepping in. His response is fluctuating, the doctor said after a few minutes, his voice measured. We're stabilizing, but we need to be prepared. Monica inclined her head. I understand. Have you been able to reach his father? Monica did not look away from Lucas. They tried last night. We should try again. The nurse moved toward the phone. Monica did not intervene, because she already knew what would happen. The call was placed. The line rang. And again there was no answer. The nurse tried a second number. Vanessa. This time the response was immediate. Hello? The same tone, present, controlled. The nurse repeated the message. Urgency conveyed without panic. We need Ethan Walker to return to the hospital as soon as possible. A pause. Then Vanessa replied, I'll let him know. Again. The same phrasing. Monica registered it without turning. She did not need to see the nurse's reaction to understand what had just been confirmed. Timing, alignment, consistency. The nurse ended the call, her expression tightening almost imperceptibly before returning to her work. We'll continue with what we can here, she said. Monica nodded once. Thank you. Inside the room, the interventions continued. The machines adjusted, compensating, stabilizing, holding the line between what could be managed and what could not. Minutes passed, then more. Eventually, the immediate crisis eased. Not resolved, but contained. For now, the doctor exhaled slowly. We've stabilized him again, he said. But the window is narrowing. Monica absorbed the words without visible shift. How much time, she asked. The doctor hesitated. It's difficult to say precisely, but we should prepare for rapid change. Monica nodded. I will. He studied her for a moment, as if expecting something more. A question, a reaction, a request. None came. He left the room with the others, the quiet intensity of the moment dissolving back into the steady rhythm of the hospital. Monica remained, her hand still resting against Lucas's, her posture unchanged, her presence constant. Across the city, Ethan Walker received the message nearly 20 minutes later. Not from the hospital, from Vanessa. Her call came through while he was seated in a private dining area, the remains of a late breakfast still on the table. He glanced at the screen before answering. Hey, Ethan, the hospital called? Vanessa said, her voice low but urgent enough to carry weight. It's Lucas. They need you there. Ethan leaned back slightly, his expression tightening just enough to register concern. What happened? They didn't go into detail, just said it's important. There was a pause. Brief, measured. I have a meeting in 30 minutes, Ethan said. I'll go after. Vanessa did not respond immediately. Then softly, you should probably go now. Ethan exhaled. I said I'll go. Another pause, this one longer. Okay, Vanessa said finally. The call ended. Ethan set the phone down. He remained seated for a moment, his gaze drifting toward the window, toward the city, moving outside in steady, indifferent motion. Then he checked his watch, calculated, adjusted. Across from him, an empty chair remained slightly angled toward his own, a detail he did not notice. Back at the hospital, Monica stood for the first time in over an hour. Not abruptly, not with urgency, but with intention, She adjusted the blanket around Lucas once more, ensuring everything remained exactly as it should be. Then she stepped out into the corridor. The nurses moved past her in quiet coordination, their routines continuing without interruption. Monica walked toward the consultation room again. Inside, she closed the door, sat, and opened her phone. A new message awaited her. From her legal team: initial containment measures in place. Financial access points restricted per protocol. Awaiting further instruction. Monica read it once, then again. She did not respond immediately. Instead, she opened another application. The account, transactions, access logs. Everything aligned exactly as expected. Ethan had not yet encountered the shift, not directly, but the structure had already moved around him. Quietly, precisely, Monica typed a response. Maintain current status, no escalation. She sent it, closed the phone, and sat back for a moment, allowing the silence to settle. This was the point where many would act, where anger might surface, where confrontation would seem justified. Monica did none of those things, because she understood something fundamental. Timing was not about speed. It was about sequence, and the sequence was not yet complete. She stood, left the room, and returned to Lucas. Minutes later, the door opened. Ethan. He entered with controlled urgency, his movement slightly faster than before, his expression arranged into something that suggested he had come as quickly as possible. What happened? He asked. Monica looked at him, then at Lucas. He had another episode, she said. Ethan moved closer, his eyes scanning the monitors without fully understanding them. Is he stable for now? A pause. Ethan nodded. Vanessa told me. Monica did not respond, because that too was already recorded. He stood there for a moment, uncertain, as if waiting for something else to be said. Nothing was. The silence remained, not empty, but full, of everything he did not yet understand. Monica turned her attention back to Lucas, her hand resting lightly against his, her presence unchanged. Ethan shifted slightly, glancing at his phone, then back at the room. For the first time, something in his expression faltered. Not fully, not enough to name, but enough to register. Because somewhere beneath the surface, without knowing why, he could feel it. The structure around him had changed. And Monica Flores, who had said nothing, had already ensured that when it mattered, he would not be ready. Ethan Walker believed in timing, not in the precise, measured way Monica Flores understood it, but in a more convenient sense, the kind that allowed him to act when it felt advantageous, when the moment seemed to favor him, when resistance appeared weakest. And in his estimation, that moment had arrived. The hospital, with its sterile quiet and controlled urgency, had become a place he no longer belonged, not because he was unwelcome, but because it demanded something he had already begun to withdraw: consistency, presence, endurance. To Ethan, those were no longer sustainable obligations. They were limitations. And so, in the days following Lucas's most recent episode, as Monica remained anchored beside their son, Ethan moved forward with a decision he had been shaping quietly alongside everything else. The paperwork had already been prepared, not hastily, not impulsively, but with the same calculated structure he applied to every major step in his life. Legal consultation, asset considerations, custody assumptions framed in conditional language that reflected the reality he had chosen not to fully confront. He reviewed the documents late one evening in his apartment, seated at a glass table that reflected his image back at him in clean, uninterrupted lines. Divorce. The word did not unsettle him. It aligned. In his mind, it was a correction, a necessary realignment of a life that had drifted too far from what he believed it should be. Monica, in his perspective, had already withdrawn. Not emotionally, he no longer measured that with accuracy, but functionally. She existed in a space he did not understand, focused on things he had long since dismissed as secondary. The hospital had accelerated that distance. It had made visible what he had already begun to feel, and Vanessa had made it easier to accept. She did not push. She did not demand. She simply existed in contrast, present in ways that felt immediate, responsive in ways that required no interpretation. She met his thoughts with agreement, his frustrations with validation, his decisions with quiet support. With her, everything felt lighter, simpler, more aligned with the version of himself he preferred. And so, when the final draft of the divorce papers arrived, Ethan did not hesitate. He signed, not with emotion, not with doubt, but with the same calm certainty Monica had displayed in other moments he had failed to understand. The difference was that his certainty was based on assumption. Hers was not. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the hospital earlier than usual, not out of urgency, but out of intention. He carried the folder with him, its contents structured, complete, legally binding. The weight of it was not physical, but it existed nonetheless. A quiet confirmation that what he was about to do had already been decided. Vanessa had been the only one aware of the timing. They had spoken briefly the night before. "You're sure?" she had asked. Ethan nodded. "It's already done. This is just formalizing it." Vanessa had studied him for a moment, then inclined her head. "She won't fight it." Ethan had considered that, then nodded again. "I know." That belief stayed with him as he walked through the hospital corridor, the familiar environment now carrying a different tone. He noticed the same details as before: the nurses, the quiet movement, the distant sound of monitors, but they no longer held his focus. His attention was directed forward, toward the room, toward Monica. Inside, Monica sat beside Lucas. Her posture unchanged, her presence as steady as it had been through every previous day. She did not look up immediately when Ethan entered. Not because she had not noticed, but because she had. And she chose the timing of her response. "Monica," Ethan said, his voice low. She turned then, calm, attentive, unmoved. "We need to talk." The phrase settled into the room with a kind of finality that suggested it had been rehearsed. Monica inclined her head slightly. About what Ethan stepped further inside, closing the door behind him with quiet precision. He did not sit. He remained standing, positioning himself in a way that allowed him to maintain control of the conversation as he understood it. "This," he said, gesturing briefly to the room, the hospital, the situation that surrounded them. "Everything." Monica did not follow the gesture. Her gaze remained on him. Ethan exhaled once, as if preparing to move through something he had already structured in his mind. "I can't keep doing this," he said. The words were measured, not raised, not emotional, but definitive. Monica listened, not reacting, not interrupting, just allowing the statement to exist. Ethan continued, "This isn't a life. It hasn't been for a while." He paused briefly, then added, "We both know that." The assumption was placed between them. Monica did not accept it. She did not reject it either. She simply did not engage with it. Ethan reached into the folder, removed the documents, placed them on the table beside her. The sound was soft, but precise. "I've already started the process," he said. "This is the formal filing." Monica's gaze shifted to the papers. Not immediately, just enough to acknowledge their presence. Then back to Ethan. "You're divorcing me," she said. It was not a question. Ethan nodded. "Yes." A pause. Short, contained. Monica looked at the documents again, then back at him. Now, another statement, not a challenge. Ethan held her gaze. "There's no point in waiting," he said. Dragging this out doesn't help anyone. Anyone. The word included and excluded at the same time. Monica did not point that out, because she did not need to. Ethan continued, his tone remaining controlled. I've thought this through. This is the best decision for both of us. And then, after a brief hesitation that lasted just long enough to register, I'm moving on. The meaning behind it did not require explanation. It was already present, structured, aligned with everything Monica had been documenting. She did not look toward the door. She did not ask who, because she already knew. Instead, she reached for the documents. Not with hesitation, not with urgency, but with the same deliberate precision that defined everything she did. She opened them, scanned the first page, then the next. Her eyes moved steadily across the text, absorbing the language, the conditions, the assumptions built into the structure Ethan believed he controlled. Ethan watched her, waiting, expecting resistance, emotion, something that would confirm the weight of what he had done. None came. Monica closed the folder, placed it back on the table, then looked at him. "When do you expect this to be finalized?" she asked. The question caught him slightly off guard. Not because it was unexpected, but because it lacked the reaction he had anticipated. "Soon," he said. "The process is straightforward." Monica nodded once. "I see." Silence settled between them, not empty, but filled with everything that had not been said. Ethan shifted slightly, his confidence holding, but no longer entirely unchallenged. "You don't want to discuss this?" he asked. Monica considered the question, then answered, "No." One word, clear, complete. Ethan studied her for a moment longer, as if searching for something beneath the surface. Something that would make the moment feel real in the way he had expected. But Monica gave him nothing. Not resistance, not agreement, just acknowledgement. Behind her, the machines continued their steady rhythm. Lucas remained still, unaware of the structure shifting around him. Ethan glanced toward the bed, then back at Monica. "I'll give you time to review everything he said. We can handle the rest through attorneys." Monica nodded. "That would be appropriate." Appropriate. The word landed with a weight Ethan did not fully understand. He picked up the folder, then hesitated. "You'll sign?" he asked. Monica met his gaze. "Yes." No hesitation, no condition, just confirmation. Ethan exhaled slightly, a subtle release of tension he had not acknowledged until that moment. "Okay." He turned toward the door, paused, then added without looking back, "This is better this way." Monica did not respond, because the statement was not for her. It was for him. The door closed behind him with a soft, controlled sound. And just like that, the moment Ethan had believed would define the outcome passed without resistance, without conflict, without the reaction he had expected. Monica remained seated, her hand resting beside Lucas. Her posture unchanged, but internally the sequence had advanced. Not disrupted, not altered, but confirmed. She reached for her bag, removed the notebook, and wrote, "Divorce initiated by Ethan. Timing aligned with pattern. Assumption of compliance confirmed." She paused, then added one final line. "Proceed." The hospital did not change its rhythm for personal decisions. Monitors continued their steady cadence. Nurses moved with quiet efficiency. The corridor remained a place where urgency existed without noise, where lives shifted without announcement. And within that stillness, Ethan Walker chose his moment. He returned in the late afternoon, not alone. Monica saw them before they reached the door. The reflection in the glass panel revealed their approach, first two figures moving in quiet alignment. Their pace measured their distance, calibrated just enough to appear appropriate in a place like this. Ethan in front, Vanessa slightly behind, but not far enough to be mistaken for anything else. Monica did not turn immediately. She remained seated beside Lucas, her hand resting lightly against his arm, her attention fixed on the monitors, as if nothing outside that space required her acknowledgement. The door opened. Ethan stepped in. Vanessa followed. No hesitation, no attempt to remain outside. That more than anything defined the moment. Monica turned then. Her gaze moved from Ethan to Vanessa, then back again. Not surprised, not questioning, just observing. "We need to finalize this." Ethan said, his tone controlled, but carrying a faint edge that suggested impatience beneath the surface. Monica inclined her head slightly. Now Ethan nodded. There's no reason to delay. Behind him, Vanessa stood with quiet composure, her presence no longer framed as incidental. She had stepped into the space fully, claimed it without speaking. Monica registered that. Not emotionally, structurally. "Close the door," Ethan added without looking back. Vanessa did. The sound was soft, definitive. 3 people, 1 room, 1 child between them. Unaware. Monica shifted slightly in her chair, adjusting her position so that she remained beside Lucas, not across from Ethan. A small decision, but intentional. Ethan placed the folder on the table again this time, with less restraint. The movement sharper, more direct. "I've already spoken to the attorney," he said. "Everything is prepared. We just need your signature." Monica looked at the documents, then at him, and her she asked. The question was simple, but precise. Ethan did not hesitate. "She knows," he said. Vanessa met Monica's gaze then. For the first time without the buffer of politeness. There was no apology there, no attempt to soften the reality of what had already been established. Only quiet confirmation. Monica nodded once. "I see." The room settled into a silence that was heavier than before, not because of volume, but because of alignment. Ethan stepped closer. "This isn't working," he said again, as if repetition would reinforce the validity of the statement. "You've been somewhere else for a long time. Somewhere else." Monica did not correct him, because in a way he was right, just not in the way he understood. "And I'm done pretending it is," Ethan continued. Vanessa remained still behind him, present, unhidden. Monica looked down at Lucas. His breathing remained steady under assistance, the monitors unchanged. For a moment, nothing else existed. Then she reached for the pen. Ethan watched the movement. There it was. The moment he had anticipated. Not conflict, but conclusion. Monica opened the folder, turned to the designated page. Her eyes moved across the text one final time. Not to understand, but to confirm, because she had already reviewed it, already processed every clause, already noted every assumption embedded within it. Ethan shifted slightly. "You don't have to read all of it again," he said. "It's standard." Monica did not look up. "I know." Her voice remained even. She placed the pen against the paper, paused for a fraction of a second, then signed. Her name moved across the line with the same precision that had defined everything else she had done. No hesitation, no embellishment, just completion. Ethan exhaled, a subtle release. Vanessa's posture softened slightly behind him, not visibly to most, but enough. Monica closed the folder, placed the pen down, and returned her hand to Lucas. The action was quiet, but final. Ethan picked up the documents, checked the signature, confirmed it, then looked at Monica again. "That's it," he said. Monica nodded. "Yes, no accusation, no confrontation, just acknowledgement." Ethan hesitated. For a moment, something in his expression shifted. Not doubt, not regret, but something less defined. A gap between expectation and reality. He had anticipated resistance, emotion, some form of reaction that would validate the weight of what he had done. Instead, he had received none, and that absence created something he could not immediately resolve. "You're taking this better than I expected," he said. Monica looked at him, then at Vanessa, then back again. "I understand," she said. The words were simple, but incomplete. Ethan frowned slightly. Understand what Monica held his gaze. The decision, she did not elaborate, because she did not need to. Ethan studied her for another moment, then nodded. "Good." He turned toward the door. Vanessa followed. But before they reached it, Monica spoke again. "Ethan." He paused, turned back. Yes, Monica's expression did not change. "When did you decide the question was not emotional, not accusatory, just precise?" Ethan considered it, then answered. "A while ago," Monica nodded. "That aligns." The phrase registered, but not fully. Ethan did not ask what she meant, because in his mind, the moment had already passed. The decision had been made, the outcome secured. Vanessa opened the door. They stepped out into the corridor together. This time, they did not adjust their distance. They walked side by side, openly, as if the space itself had already acknowledged the shift. Inside the room, the silence returned. Monica remained seated, her hand resting beside Lucas. Her posture unchanged. But internally, the sequence had reached a critical point. Not the end, but the transition. She reached for her bag, removed the notebook, and wrote. Divorce executed, signed. Public presence of Vanessa confirmed. Behavior unchanged post-signature. She paused, then added one final line. Threshold crossed. Monica closed the notebook, placed it back, and leaned slightly closer to Lucas. "I'm here," she said again. Outside, Ethan Walker walked away from the hospital with the certainty that everything had gone according to plan, that he had taken control, that he had ended something that no longer served him. He did not look back. He did not hesitate. He did not question the absence of resistance, because he believed he understood it. He believed he had seen the full picture. He had not, and Monica Flores, who had signed without a word, had not surrendered anything. She had simply allowed the moment to complete itself. Because now, for the first time, everything that needed to be in place was. Monica Flores did not begin with confrontation. She began with order. The morning after the papers were signed, the hospital felt unchanged in all the ways that mattered to everyone except her. Nurses exchanged updates in low tones. The machines continued their measured work. The corridor carried the same filtered light that made every hour feel indistinguishable from the last. Monica remained beside Lucas. Her presence had not shifted, but her position had, not within the room, within the structure. She waited until Lucas's condition stabilized into a fragile equilibrium before stepping out. Not because she needed distance, but because timing required separation. The consultation room at the end of the corridor was empty when she entered. She closed the door softly behind her and sat placing her bag on the table with the same precision she had applied to everything else. The phone came out first, then the notebook, then the laptop. 3 objects, 3 records, each aligned. Monica opened the secure channel. Her legal team had already anticipated the transition. Ready to proceed upon instruction, the message read. Monica did not type immediately. Instead, she opened the folders she had prepared days earlier. Digital copies of everything she had documented. Not interpretations, not conclusions, evidence, bank statements with highlighted transactions that traced a pattern across months, email threads recovered from archived servers reconstructed in sequence, showing tone shifts that mirrored behavioral change. Location data cross-referenced with timestamps that placed Ethan and Vanessa in the same places at the same times, places that had never been part of their shared life. And the recording. Short, unremarkable in length, but precise in content. A conversation captured unintentionally, preserved without alteration. Not dramatic, not incriminating in tone, but definitive in implication. Monica reviewed each file without expression. Not because she needed to, but because verification for her was not a single act. It was a discipline. When she finished, she closed the folder and returned to the message. "Begin formal filing," she typed. "Include all supporting documentation. Prioritize asset protection and custody parameters." She paused, then added, "Do not notify opposing counsel until submission is complete." She sent it. The response came within seconds. Understood. Monica closed the channel. The first movement had been made. Not visible, not public, but irreversible. She sat for a moment longer, allowing the silence of the room to settle around her. This was the point where emotion often surfaced for others. The moment when action, once initiated, created a space for reflection. Monica did not enter that space, because reflection for her had already occurred. What remained was execution. She stood, gathered her things, and returned to Lucas. He had not moved. The machines maintained their steady rhythm, though Monica could see, even without looking directly at the monitors, that the margin remained narrow. She adjusted the blanket again, sat, placed her hand beside his. "I'm here," she said quietly. The words had not changed, but their meaning had deepened. Across the city, Ethan Walker was beginning his day under a different set of assumptions. He believed the matter had been resolved, that the signature represented closure, that the absence of resistance confirmed alignment. He moved through his morning with the same controlled confidence he had carried into the hospital the day before. Meetings scheduled, calls returned, plans resumed. Vanessa remained present, not constantly, but consistently. They did not rush the transition into something public. There was an understanding between them, unspoken but clear, that appearances still required management. Timing in their version of the world was about perception. They met for lunch, a place chosen for discretion, quiet, neutral. Ethan sat across from her, his posture relaxed in a way it had not been for months. "It's done," he said. Vanessa studied him for a moment. And she signed yes, no hesitation, no complication. Vanessa nodded slowly. "I told you she wouldn't fight it." Ethan allowed himself a small exhale. Relief, though he did not name it. "It's better this way," he said. "For everyone." Vanessa did not challenge that. Instead, she shifted the conversation forward. "What happens next?" Ethan leaned back slightly. "We finalize everything. Assets arrangements, the usual process." He spoke with familiarity, as if the structure were already under his control. Vanessa watched him carefully. And Lucas, the question landed differently. Ethan's expression shifted just slightly. "We'll see," he said. "It depends on how things develop. The word avoided definition. Vanessa nodded. She did not press, because she did not need to. Their understanding did not require full articulation. Back at the hospital, Monica's legal team moved with precision. The filing was prepared in layers. Primary petition, supporting documentation, financial records, digital correspondence. Each piece placed exactly where it would carry the most weight. Not excessive, not overwhelming, but complete. The timing was deliberate, submission scheduled for late afternoon. A window that ensured processing before end of day while limiting immediate response. Monica did not monitor every step. She did not need to, because she had already structured the sequence. Instead, she remained where she had always been. Beside Lucas, present. When the doctor entered that afternoon, his expression carried a different weight. Not urgent, but definitive. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Monica stood, followed him into the corridor. They walked a short distance before he stopped. "There's been further decline," he said. "We're maintaining stability, but the progression is accelerating." Monica listened. No interruption. "We need to prepare for all outcomes," he added. Monica inclined her head. "I understand." The doctor studied her for a moment. "You've been very strong through all of this," he said. Monica did not respond to the statement, because strength as he defined it was not what she was measuring. She returned to Lucas's room, sat, placed her hand beside his again. Time continued, measured, unforgiving. Her phone vibrated, once. She did not reach for it immediately, because she already knew what it would be. When she did, she opened the message. From her legal team. Filing submitted. All documents accepted. Awaiting service confirmation. Monica read it, then closed the phone. The next phase had begun. Ethan Walker, who believed the structure had closed around him in his favor, had not yet encountered the shift. But he would. Not through confrontation, not through accusation, but through process, through systems he trusted, through mechanisms he believed he understood. Monica leaned slightly closer to Lucas. Her voice remained steady. "I'm here." Outside, the city continued its movement, unaware, unchanged. But within that movement, something had already been set into motion. Not loudly, not visibly, but with precision. And once begun, it would not reverse. The first disruption did not arrive with noise. It arrived as a refusal. Ethan Walker noticed it in the middle of an otherwise ordinary transaction. A payment he had authorized, a routine transfer tied to a property expense, failed to process. The notification appeared on his screen with neutral language. Transaction declined. Please contact your financial institution. He frowned slightly, more inconvenienced than concerned. Errors happened. Systems misread data. Banks flagged activity unnecessarily. He tried again. The result did not change. For a moment, he remained still, his gaze fixed on the screen, as if the message might correct itself. Then he opened the banking application, navigating through the interface with practiced familiarity. Balances appeared, accounts intact. But something felt different. Access layers had shifted. Permissions, though not visibly removed, had tightened in ways that required additional verification. Ethan exhaled once. Irritation, not alarm. He initiated a call. The automated system processed his request, routed him through options designed to manage time and expectation. When a representative finally answered, her tone was professional neutral. "How may I assist you today? I'm having an issue with a transaction," Ethan said. "It's being declined, without reason." There was a pause as she reviewed the account. "I see the transaction," she said. "There appears to be a restriction placed on this account." Ethan's expression shifted slightly. "What kind of restriction?" "Legal review status," she replied. "I'm not authorized to provide further details. You'll need to contact your legal representative." Legal. The word landed differently. Ethan straightened slightly. "There must be a mistake," he said. "I haven't initiated anything that would trigger." "I understand your concern," the representative interrupted gently. "But the notation is clear. The account is under review." Ethan ended the call without further comment. For a moment he remained seated, his phone still in his hand, his reflection faintly visible in the darkened screen. Then he moved. Not toward resolution, toward assumption. He opened another application, a secondary account. Same result. Not blocked, but altered. Restricted. Subtle, but intentional. Ethan stood. The room around him, his office, his space, his controlled environment remained unchanged. Clean lines, ordered surfaces, everything in place, except the system beneath it. He reached for his jacket, because if something had shifted, he would correct it. That had always been his approach. Direct, immediate, controlled. Across the city, Vanessa Grant noticed the change in a different way, not through systems, through absence. Ethan's messages, which had maintained a consistent rhythm over the past weeks, slowed, then stopped. Not completely, but enough to register. She checked her phone again, her expression tightening slightly as she reviewed the last exchange. Busy. Call you later. That had been over an hour ago. Vanessa was not accustomed to waiting without context. She called. The line rang. Ethan answered on the third ring. What's going on? She asked, her tone controlled but direct. There's an issue with my accounts, he said. Something legal. I'm handling it. Vanessa's gaze sharpened slightly. Legal, probably a mistake, he replied. I'll sort it out. A pause. Then carefully, does this have anything to do with the divorce? Ethan exhaled. No, it's separate. The answer came too quickly, too certain. Vanessa recognized it, but she did not challenge it directly. Okay, she said. Let me know if you need anything. I won't, Ethan replied, his tone firm. The call ended. Vanessa lowered the phone slowly, her thoughts aligning in a direction she had not fully considered before. Because for the first time, something had occurred outside the structure they believed they controlled. Back at the hospital, Monica Flores remained exactly where she had been. Beside Lucas. The room carried the same quiet tension it always had. Machine's steady light filtered time measured in intervals that had nothing to do with the outside world. Monica's phone rested on the table beside her. Silent, until it wasn't. She glanced at it. A message. From her legal team, service confirmed. Financial protections active, secondary restrictions in place. Monica read it once, then set the phone down. No reaction, no visible acknowledgement, because this was not a moment of arrival. It was a continuation. She reached for the notebook, opened it, and wrote. Financial restriction triggered, timing aligned with service. Response pending observation. She paused, then added, system engagement initiated. She closed the notebook, placed it back, and returned her attention to Lucas. His condition had not improved, but it had not collapsed either. He remained in that narrow space between stability and decline, held there by intervention and time. Monica adjusted his blanket again, her movements unchanged, her presence constant. Across the city, Ethan arrived at his office earlier than planned. He moved quickly now, not visibly rushed, but focused, directed. He contacted his attorney, not the one handling the divorce, another, someone he trusted with financial matters. The call connected. I need clarification on a legal restriction placed on my accounts, Ethan said without preamble. There was a pause as the attorney accessed the relevant systems. I'm seeing a filing, the attorney said slowly. Recent, very recent. Ethan's expression tightened. What kind of filing? Another pause. Longer. Divorce-related, the attorney said. Ethan went still. That doesn't make sense, he said. I initiated the divorce. Yes, the attorney replied. But this is a counterfiling, and it includes... He stopped. Ethan's voice sharpened. Includes what? Extensive documentation the attorney finished carefully. Financial records, communication logs. There are also preliminary requests for asset protection and review of account activity. Ethan did not speak for a moment, because the structure he believed he understood had just shifted in a way he had not anticipated. "This must be standard," he said finally. "Procedural." "No," the attorney replied. "This is not standard." Silence, heavy, measured. "What does it mean?" Ethan asked. "It means," the attorney said, "that she was prepared." Prepared. The word landed with a weight that extended beyond its definition. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened slightly. "That's not possible," he said. But even as he said it, something in his mind began to align. Moments, absences, her silence, her lack of resistance. It had not been submission. It had been sequence. Back at the hospital, Monica remained still, unchanged. But the structure around her had begun to move. Not loudly, not visibly, but with precision. And Ethan Walker, for the first time, was no longer ahead of it. He was inside it. The first time Ethan Walker understood that he was no longer directing the sequence, it did not feel like a realization. It felt like resistance. Not from Monica, from the systems he had always trusted. He arrived at his attorney's office before the end of the day, the folder from the hospital still in his briefcase, now irrelevant in ways he had not anticipated. The building itself was familiar glass steel controlled access, a place where decisions were documented and enforced with clarity. Inside, nothing appeared different. But the tone shifted as soon as he sat down. Across the table, his attorney, Daniel Reeves, had already prepared the documents. Printed, organized, labeled, not as a summary, as evidence. Ethan did not sit immediately. "What exactly are we dealing with?" he asked. Daniel gestured toward the chair. "You should sit." Ethan did. The file was opened. The first document was placed in front of him. Not the divorce petition he had initiated. A separate filing. Monica's. Ethan scanned the first page, his eyes moving quickly, searching for structure, for familiar language, for something that would place this within a framework he understood. Petitioner Monica Flores. Respondent Ethan Walker. Filing type counterpetition. Attached documentation extensive. Ethan's jaw tightened. "This is excessive," he said. "What is she trying to do?" Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned the page. The next document. Bank records, highlighted, time-stamped, cross-referenced. Ethan's gaze sharpened. "These are just transactions," he said. Daniel met his eyes. Read the pattern. Ethan looked again. Dates, locations, amounts. At first they appeared unrelated. Then the alignment emerged. Each transaction corresponding to a time he had not been where he said he was. Each location aligning with entries he had not disclosed. The structure was not random. It was precise. Ethan leaned back slightly. "This proves nothing," he said. Daniel did not argue. He turned to the next document. Email threads. Recovered. Sequenced. Ethan recognized the addresses immediately. His own, Vanessa's. Fragments of conversation. Incomplete individually. But when placed together, they formed continuity. Tone shifts. Language that moved from neutral to familiar. References that required context. Context Monica had. Ethan's expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. "These are private communications," he said. "They were accessible through shared systems," Daniel replied. "Legally obtained." Ethan said nothing. Daniel continued. The next document. Location data. Compiled. Mapped. Overlaying timelines from both accounts. Ethan's movements. Vanessa's movements. Intersecting. Repeatedly. Ethan looked at the page, then away, then back again, because denial required distance, and the document did not allow it. "This is circumstantial," he said. Daniel did not respond. He reached for the final item, a transcript, short, concise, the recording Monica had preserved. Ethan read it, once, then again. The words themselves were not explicit. No declarations, no admissions, but the familiarity, the tone, the absence of boundaries. It was enough. Ethan placed the paper down slowly. The room remained silent. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had already been said. Through record, through structure, through alignment. "This is her response to the divorce," Ethan asked finally. Daniel folded his hands. "This is her position." Ethan exhaled, a controlled breath, but it did not stabilize anything. "What does she want?" he asked. Daniel's expression remained neutral. "Asset protection." Ethan frowned. "That's standard." "This isn't standard," Daniel replied. "She's requested a full review of shared assets, including recent transactions and discretionary expenditures." Ethan's gaze sharpened. "That's excessive. She's also requested temporary restrictions on account access pending review." Ethan did not speak, because that part had already reached him. He felt it now, not as inconvenience, as structure. "And custody?" Ethan asked. Daniel hesitated. "Primary decision-making authority." Ethan's head lifted. "That's not happening," he said. Daniel did not challenge him. He simply placed another document on the table. Medical records, attendance logs, time-stamped, hospital entries. Monica's presence, continuous. Ethan's, fragmented, inconsistent, absent during critical intervals. Ethan stared at the page. Because this, more than anything else, was not something he had considered. Not in terms of documentation, not in terms of consequence. "These are just circumstances," he said. Daniel's voice remained steady. "These are records." The distinction was precise and irreversible. Ethan leaned back again, this time further. His reflection appeared faintly in the glass surface of the table. For a moment he did not recognize it, because the version of control he had been operating under no longer aligned with the reality in front of him. "When did she do all this?" he asked. Daniel did not hesitate. "Before you filed?" The answer settled into the room with weight. Ethan's mind moved quickly now, reconstructing, revisiting. Her silence, her lack of resistance, her immediate agreement. It had not been acceptance. It had been completion. "She knew," Ethan said quietly. Daniel did not respond, because the answer was already present. Ethan stood, walked to the window. The city moved below, unchanged, unaware of the shift occurring within one of its many offices. "She never said anything," he added. Daniel remained seated. She didn't need to. Ethan turned back. His expression no longer held the same certainty. "What are my options?" he asked. Daniel considered the question, then answered, "Compliance." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And if I don't?" Daniel met his gaze. "Then this becomes more complex." A pause, measured, and more public. Public. The word carried implications Ethan had not accounted for. Reputation, position, everything he had been building, now intersecting with something he had assumed would remain private. He exhaled slowly. "Where is she now?" he asked. Daniel did not need to check. The hospital, of course. Ethan nodded once, not in acknowledgement, in recalibration, because for the first time, he understood that the environment he had dismissed the hospital, the quiet. The stillness had been the center of something far larger than he had seen. And Monica Flores, who had remained there, had not been stationary. She had been positioning everything. Back at the hospital, Monica sat beside Lucas, unchanged, her hand resting lightly against his. The machines continued their steady rhythm. The room remained quiet. Her phone remained still. Because she did not need updates. The process was moving exactly as intended. She leaned slightly closer to Lucas. "I'm here," she said again. Not for reassurance, for presence. Outside, the structure continued to shift. Ethan Walker, who had believed he understood the outcome, was now moving within a system that no longer responded to his assumptions. And Monica Flores, who had never raised her voice, had already ensured that the truth would not need to. Consequences did not arrive all at once. They unfolded with the same precision Monica Flores had applied to everything else. One system at a time, one layer at a time. Ethan Walker felt it first in the spaces he had once moved through without resistance. The financial restrictions tightened, not visibly dramatic, not in a way that triggered immediate alarm to anyone outside the structure, but enough to disrupt flow. Transactions required approval. Transfers paused under review. Access points that had once responded instantly now required verification, documentation, delay. It was not a shutdown. It was control. At his office, conversations shifted in tone. Subtle at first, then more defined. A scheduled meeting with senior leadership was postponed without clear explanation. A project he had been leading was reassigned temporarily. The language remained professional, but the distance it created was unmistakable. Ethan noticed. He did not comment, because he understood something had moved beyond his reach, even if he could not yet see the full shape of it. Vanessa Grant experienced the shift differently, not through systems, through silence. Calls that once connected easily now went unanswered longer than expected. Messages received shorter replies. Meetings postponed, then rescheduled, then quietly canceled. She adjusted. At first, gave space, allowed time. But time, when unstructured, reveals absence. And Vanessa was not someone who ignored absence. She arrived at Ethan's apartment one evening without calling first. The door opened after a delay. Ethan stood there, his expression controlled but no longer composed in the way she had come to expect. "You didn't answer," she said. "I've been dealing with something," he replied. Vanessa stepped inside without waiting for invitation. What kind of something? Ethan closed the door behind her. "Legal." The word hung in the air. Vanessa turned to face him fully. From the divorce, Ethan hesitated, then nodded. She filed back. Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means she was already prepared." Ethan said the words measured, but carrying a weight he could not entirely contain. Vanessa studied him. "Prepared?" The implication settled quickly. "She knew," Vanessa said. Ethan did not respond, because the answer was already there. Vanessa crossed the room slowly. "And you didn't see it?" she asked. Not accusation, not yet, but close. Ethan's jaw tightened. She didn't react. She didn't say anything. Vanessa stopped a few steps away. That doesn't mean she didn't know. The silence that followed was no longer neutral. It carried friction. Because for the first time, the alignment between them was no longer seamless. Vanessa had built her position on certainty, on the assumption that Ethan understood the structure he was moving within. Now that assumption had fractured. What exactly did she file? Vanessa asked. Ethan exhaled. Everything. The word was not an exaggeration. It was accurate. Financial records, messages, locations. He paused. Custody. Vanessa's posture shifted. Not outwardly dramatic, but enough, and she's requesting primary authority. Vanessa absorbed that. Quickly, precisely. And the money she asked. Ethan's expression tightened, restricted. Vanessa did not move, did not speak immediately, because this was the point where the structure she had believed in began to shift beneath her as well. Not dramatically, not visibly, but enough to register. "You said everything was handled," she said finally. Ethan met her gaze. It was. The statement no longer held. Vanessa saw that. And in that moment, something recalibrated. Not loyalty, not yet. But position. Back at the hospital, Monica Flores remained beside Lucas. The room had not changed. The machines continued their quiet rhythm. The light remained steady. Time moved in the same measured increments that had defined every day before. But within that stillness, the emotional center of the story had reached its highest point. Lucas's condition had declined again, not suddenly, but undeniably. The doctor stood at the foot of the bed, his voice low, his words carefully chosen. "We're approaching the limits of intervention," he said. Monica listened, her posture unchanged. "We can continue support," he added. "But we need to discuss what that means." Monica nodded once. "I understand." The doctor hesitated. "You've handled everything with remarkable clarity," he said. Monica did not respond to the compliment, because clarity for her was not something to be recognized. It was something to be maintained. She looked at Lucas, at the small, fragile rhythm that still held, at the space between breaths that had grown longer, more deliberate. She reached for his hand, held it gently. "I'm here," she said. The words remained the same. But now they carried finality, not an outcome, in presence. Across the city, Ethan Walker stood in a space he no longer controlled. His attorney's words echoed in his mind. Prepared, structured, documented. He replayed the moment in the hospital, the signature, her silence, her lack of resistance. It had not been surrender. It had been completion. And now everything that followed was consequence. He picked up his phone, paused, then dialed. The line rang. Once, twice. Monica's phone vibrated on the table beside her. She glanced at it, saw his name, did not answer, not out of anger, not out of avoidance, but because the conversation he wanted was no longer necessary. The structure had moved beyond words. Ethan ended the call, stared at the screen for a moment, then lowered it slowly. For the first time, the weight of the situation was no longer abstract. It was real. Not because of what he had lost, but because of what he had misunderstood. Vanessa watched him from across the room, silent, observing, calculating. Because she understood something now that she had not fully considered before. This was not just about a marriage. This was about structure, power, timing, and she had aligned herself with the wrong side of it. Back in the hospital, the machines continued their steady rhythm. Monica remained beside Lucas, unmoved, unshaken, not because she did not feel, but because she chose where feeling belonged. And in that moment, it belonged here, not in the past, not in the systems unfolding elsewhere, but in the space beside her son. The doctor stepped back quietly. The room settled. And Monica Flores, who had never raised her voice, who had never confronted, who had never demanded, had already allowed everything to become exactly what it was. And what it was enough. By the time everything settled into its final form, there was no moment that could be pointed to as the end. There was no single scene where everything resolved at once. No raised voices, no declarations, no visible collapse. Because the truth once structured correctly does not require performance. It simply remains. Monica Flores understood that. She had understood it long before the hospital, long before the silence between her and Ethan had taken shape long before the pattern of absence had revealed itself for what it was. Now sitting beside Lucas in the quiet room that had become the center of everything, she did not look toward what had unfolded outside. She remained where it mattered. Lucas's breathing had slowed, not abruptly, not with struggle, but with a gradual stillness that even the machines could not fully disguise. The doctor had spoken earlier, carefully, clearly. There were no more interventions that would change the outcome. Only support, only presence. Monica had listened, nodded, accepted, not because it was easy, but because it was real. She held Lucas's hand gently, her fingers steady, her touch constant. "I'm here," she said. The words had not changed. They did not need to, because they had never been about reassurance. They had always been about truth. Minutes passed, then more. Time in that room no longer moved in the same way. It stretched, softened, became something less measurable, until quietly, without resistance, the rhythm stopped. The machines registered it first. A shift, then a line. The nurse moved quickly, then slowed. The doctor entered, his expression composed, his movements controlled. They confirmed what Monica already knew. There was no urgency now, no intervention, only acknowledgement. The doctor spoke, words that had been prepared long before they were needed. Monica listened, then nodded. No collapse, no outward breaking, just stillness, because everything that needed to be said had already been said. Through presence, through time, through the simple, unchanging truth that she had been there. Every moment that mattered. Later, when the room had quieted again, when the machines had been turned off, when the space no longer held the tension it once had, Monica stood, not abruptly, not with hesitation, but with the same deliberate precision that had defined everything she had done. She adjusted the blanket one final time, a small gesture, but complete. Then she stepped back. The room did not change, but its meaning did. Outside, the hospital continued, unaware, unaltered, life moving forward in the same measured way it always had. Monica walked through the corridor without urgency, past the nurse's station, past the consultation rooms, toward the exit. Her phone remained in her hand, silent, not because there were no messages, but because none of them required immediate response. Ethan Walker stood on the other side of that silence. He had arrived too late. Not dramatically, not in a way that created a scene, but in a way that aligned perfectly with everything that had come before. His absence had been consistent. His timing had been his own. And now the consequence of that timing was final. He stood in the hallway outside the room, his posture uncertain in a way that had not existed before. The door was closed. He did not reach for it immediately, because something in him understood, even before confirmation, that the moment he had delayed had already passed. When the doctor approached him, the conversation was brief, professional, clear. Ethan listened, did not interrupt, did not argue, because there was nothing to argue with. The structure had completed itself. He nodded once, then stepped back, not toward the room, away from it. Vanessa was not there. She had stopped coming days earlier. Her absence had been quiet, gradual, aligned with the same pattern she had once used to appear. Because Vanessa understood something now that she had not before. Position mattered, and the position she had chosen no longer held. Ethan stood alone in the corridor. For the first time, fully aligned with the consequences of his own decisions. No explanation remained, no structure to adjust, only reality. Back at the exit, Monica paused briefly, not to look back, not to reconsider, but to acknowledge the space she was leaving. Then she stepped forward. Outside, the air felt different, not lighter, not heavier, just real. Her phone vibrated. A message from her legal team. Final review scheduled. Asset protection confirmed. Custody parameters secured. Monica read it once, then closed the screen, because those outcomes, while necessary, were not the center of this moment. She walked forward. Not quickly, not slowly, just with direction. The structure she had built remained intact. The systems had moved exactly as intended. The consequences had aligned without the need for confrontation. Ethan Walker would continue within that structure, navigating the limitations he had not anticipated, facing the reality that control once assumed is not easily regained. Vanessa Grant would move elsewhere, reposition, reconstruct, because that had always been her nature. And Monica Flores did not need to look back at either of them, because her story had never been about them. It had been about presence, about precision, about knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. She reached the edge of the parking lot, paused briefly, then continued. No announcement, no resolution spoken aloud, just movement, forward, and that was enough. In the end, stories like this are not about revenge. They are about alignment, about what happens when silence is not weakness, but preparation. When observation becomes structure, when truth is allowed to unfold without interruption, revealing not just what people do, but who they are when no one stops them. Monica Flores never needed to raise her voice. She never needed to expose anyone publicly or demand acknowledgement. The systems spoke, the records aligned. The timing revealed everything that words could not. And perhaps that is where the real weight of this story rests. Not in the loss, not in the consequences, but in the quiet understanding that presence, real presence, cannot be replaced. That decisions made in absence do not disappear. They wait. They accumulate. And eventually they return in forms that cannot be negotiated. If you've stayed with this story until the end, you already understand something deeper than what was shown on the surface. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that don't ask for attention, but stay with you long after they're over. If this one stayed with you, you can follow for more stories that unfold the same way, quietly, precisely, and all the way to the truth.